Good evening, my friends. This is the Grimflayer. I hope you're all doing very well tonight. I am back here playing some Golgari yet again, and we are on the draw. Our opponent has mulliganed to 6. We've got a solid keep, right? It's a solid keep. We're almost certainly going to turn 1 Inquisition. So at some point, this Hissing Quagmire might become a little clunky, but for now, it is not clunky. We can go turn 1 Inquisition, turn 2 Tarmogoyf, and turn 3 Scavenging Ooze. If we don't need the activation, we can have a window to deploy the Quagmire there as things stand. Otherwise, we could ask maybe for 1 less land and 1 more piece of interaction, because we don't have a late game payoff card. Potentially accepting Skoos, depending what they're playing. That said, very solid keep. You can't complain about a hand like this, especially in a blind game 1. So, opponent's going to find a 6 they are happy with, and they will go Mountain and pass. Alright, we can't read too much into that. I like to try to figure out what they're up to turn 1, but basic Mountain is a little bit too broad to narrow it down. Snow-covered Mountain, on the other hand, might narrow it down, but as things stand, our incentives have not changed. We are going to open on the Inquisition and see that we're against Mardu Pyromancer. Alright, so conventional wisdom is that this matchup is a little bit on the tough side for us. Assassin's Trophy doesn't really make it that much better, with one fairly notable exception, that it can hit the Bedlam Reveler. That said, if the Reveler resolves, sometimes it will put the game away because we struggle to answer it, but more often they will just bury us in card advantage and have this as yet another piece that we need to worry about without necessarily being the piece. That said, the matchup is still not great, but not all that bad, and I think I haven't played much Jund against it, but I like BG Rock a little bit more than I liked Abzan. Even though Abzan had the souls and you could go to war with them, you just never seem to outgrind them. So we're certainly in for the grind here. We'll have to see how it goes. Now, we're a deck full of kill spells, so normally you will not take the young Pyromancer out of a hand like this, but since we currently lack a kill spell, that is actually the best take we have. So we're going to take away the Pyro, and we're going to pass the turn. Now, their hand does not do a whole lot right now without that Pyromancer. They're going to shock in a Blood Crypt, and they're going to pass. Maybe they found a Terminate or something. It's hard to say. We draw Hissing Quagmire. Alright, and the fact that we have now a 3rd threat in hand means that even if we're suspicious for a removal spell, we're just going to deploy a threat. Now, we know they have a Lightning Bolt, so we don't want to give them a free pass at our Skoos. We can maybe hope to deploy that later. And we also went and got a basic Forest there because they are a Blood Moon deck. So not only does that keep our life total nice and healthy by fetching a basic, we are playing around Blood Moon, which they could have for next turn in theory. So there goes the Tarmogoyf, kind of going to try to set the tone of the match. They're going to shock in a Blood Crypt and pass. Interesting. I'm not sure what they had last turn that makes them want to shock. This turn I'm definitely suspicious that they'll be casting the Kolagan's command. They have some pretty real modes on it right now. But we'll just attack first and make them take action if they're going to. And they will be tapping out, indeed, for the Kolagan's command. So they didn't really end up shrinking the Goyf, but at least keeping it from growing with that play. And they also, of course, get their value engine back in hand. So here, it's tempting to get our Scavenging Ooze rolling in one way, because eating away at their graveyard at all is good, but we know that we're giving them a very free play next turn of Young Pyromancer and to Bolt the Skoos. They still have the Goyf to deal with, but that's a very good value play. We don't want to walk into that. We could also go Swamp Tasigur. Now that's fine, but that is going to shrink the Goyf into bolt range, so we don't want to do that. This is not a bad window to play Liliana of the Veil. It's going to mean they have to have good action to follow up their Pyro if they want to play it next turn. Now, Liliana of the Veil is not very good in the matchup, but as far as windows to play her goes, this is not a bad one. Now, I tick her up, and I do end up having to pitch the Scavenging Ooze here. Again, as good as it is in the matchup, we just don't have a window to resolve it around the Lightning Bolt anytime soon. I rate the 4th land higher, also because it happens to be a manland, and also rate Tasigur higher right now. Very minor misplay here, because I should have paused at the Kolagin's command and figured out what I was going to do with my second main phase. I would have realized it's Lily, tick up, pitch Skoos. I could have pitched the Skoos to the Kolagin's command and gotten in 1 extra point of damage with the Goyf. It's a very minor thing, but when you are playing a fair deck, and when you're playing a Tarmogoyf deck, you've got to be aware of all of those little percentage point advantages, so I feel obligated to mention that one. Let's get rid of this K command. So they do have a Pyro. We know they have Lightning Bolt. They discarded their Reveler. And their final card is a Faithless Looting. That's very good for them. That kind of rebuilds their hand potentially. Even though Scavenging Ooze is, Faithless Looting is card disadvantage, it's not really when you get value out of the graveyard, and especially value out of its own flashback mode. Plus value on board, like this is the big engine of the deck right here, these two cards working in tandem. So they get rid of this Bolt. They've got 1 card left in hand. It's something new that they found, and it's a Fatal Push. Wow. You know, so that was pretty good. So their sequence, they bought back the card that we discarded out of their hand. They made us discard, and then they followed it up with some really nice value plays where they took care of our big threat. They generated 2 tokens. You know, it's they're definitely doing Pyromancer things. And now you see why Liliana looks pretty bad, because now she can just tick down to kill a token. Not very exciting. And they are empty-handed. But let's see what our top deck gives us. It is a Tarmogoyf. Now that is a good draw, because that allows us to just say, hey, you know what? We're going to play 2 threats at once. That's very, very good. Their graveyard is now large and diverse enough where we actually don't shrink our Goyf at all to cast it, which is really nice. And now this also, not only was that hyper efficient in terms of rebuilding our board, this also gives us a really interesting question with Liliana. So do we go for the ultimate here? They are empty-handed. They are literally empty-handed. So if we assume that they need some really good draws off the top to keep pace with us at this point, then we are assuming that those good draws are enough to rebuild through a couple elementals. We have a really high upside if we get to ultimate this Liliana. Even if we don't, the fact that we might force them into some bad attacks or to spend some resources is also fine. So it's kind of an open question. I don't think there's any for sure right answer, but I decided here to tick up when we're both empty-handed, and we're going to play some defense and try to ultimate the Liliana. It's a rare sight, a ulted Lily against Mardu Pyromancer. For obvious reasons, they just have a board that's really good at preventing that. But we're going to go for it, and they will flash back eluding. It's always nice value with the Pyro on the field. They're going to pitch a land and a Brutality. Neither of those do much of anything right now, so that's good for them. We're going to pass with a card in hand. Alright, we're going to draw a Treetop Village. So pretty clearly here just going to stick on the Lily plan. We've come this far. They're going to bolt her in response to ticking up. So, of course, that makes sense because they get value out of the card, and that is the best target. They don't want her to ultimate at all. Now, that is That's pretty good for them. It's pretty good for them, and it makes me want to change my tactics. So now I am looking at 4, 5, 6 plus untapping with her. 4 more turns before I can ult. It's just not realistic any longer. It might not have been the most realistic to begin with. It's certainly not realistic any longer. So, and neither is playing defense, frankly, because they are a deck that can filter their draws better than we can. So I think it is time to try to grind through all of these tokens. Looks like a daunting task, and sometimes our threats can look a little bit subpar because they don't have evasion against a deck like this. But, you know, they don't make infinite tokens, they just make a lot. So we're going to grind through them. It was not worth firing up the Hissing Quagmire there for 2 reasons. Number 1, trading it for 2 elementals is not good right now. And number 2, it allows us to potentially activate it on defense, and if not, activate our Tasigur. So we're going to play a little bit reactively with our land, and they find a Faithless Looting off the top. Man, they're just doing it. And they're going to dump another Pyro and a Lingering Souls into the yard. Very, very good for them. Yep, so they get to get free value out of the yard, value out of the cast. They're just going really wide. So they send 2 elementals at Liliana, which are all the elementals that can attack. They're not risking their Pyro, so that's an intelligent attack from them. And I chose to block. So why did I choose to block? Well, even Maelstrom Pulse, which is only a 1-of in our deck, is not really a clean out to their whole board yet, because they still have a couple spirits around, and they can still rebuild with the Pyro. Like, Pulse is not really an out anymore, it's just a good piece of removal. So if I block here, it's just 1 less token I have to grind through, and it also lets me just cash in my Liliana for another token next turn. Not the ideal use case for what still might be the most powerful Planeswalker in Modern. But, hey, gotta do what you gotta do, right? So, we will indeed cash her in because we have found another copy. And again, as underwhelming as this is, we just get to play her, take down. We are very firmly on the grind through all the tokens plan, so I think that's a better play than trying to, you know, get too cute with Tasigur. We want to keep the pressure high. We don't want them to out-top deck us, which they are in danger of doing. We have a lot of cards like Liliana. We have a lot more lands in the deck, which of course without a tracker around are pretty dead at the moment. So they're going to take 4, they're going to get in front of the Goyf, and they're going to pass. Flashing back the looting, okay. That's what I mean, they get to pitch away their extra lands. Quite good for them. They're going to send in the flying squad this time. They're going to take care of our second Lily, and they're going to chip us for 1. Then they're going to pass. Alright, so Treetop Village is, you know, no land looks good right now, right? But Treetop Village is actually incredible in this matchup because it has Trample and because it's cheap to activate. Now, it dies to Lightning Bolt, but we've already seen a couple bolts, and the village is definitely a nice way to close the game. So, do we fire up this one here? I don't think we do, because we are still kind of playing around Bolt, and it doesn't hurt to have at least 1 Tasigur activation threatening our opponent here. So we're just going to send in the big guys. Sure enough, there's a Lightning Bolt. They're going to ping our Tasigur with it, so while that's not ideal for us by any means, it's going to still represent some decent value, and we're going to activate it in response, just in case we flip a Fatal Push and they for some reason give it to us, basically, but nope, they're just going to give us back a Liliana as expected. So Tasigur's going to take some damage. And then they have to throw both elementals in front of it to kill it. So, still pretty good for us. They have to go down to 3. And of course, with treetop villages around, that's a pretty nice vulnerable life total. We will deploy the other one, and we will pass. Opponent is just going to untap and pass back. Alright, Swamp doesn't do anything here. So what do? Do we deploy the Liliana, take away a spirit, animate a manland, and send it in? I don't think so. I think 3 is so low, and trample is so relevant that we just want to end the game this very turn. They could have something very good in hand, like a fatal push. Even if they do, the double village is going to put them under a lot of pressure here. So let's see what they've got. Opponent's got to make these blocks, and unless they've got something crazy, they do not. So, a recent video of mine, I actually am blanking on which one at the moment, our opponent also attempted to chump block a treetop village, and it also did not go well. This card has trample, folks. A lot of people don't realize it. It's, again, nothing that you can really blame the opponent for. It's very uncommon, and kind of strangely feels like it doesn't fit as far as abilities on manlands go in a weird way, but maybe that's just me. Regardless, a lot of people seem to overlook the fact that the ape village does indeed have trample. That said, I don't know what our opponent had in hand, but they were pretty dead. That's what it seems like to me anyway, regardless of how they blocked there. So, you know, our opponent started the value train with a turn 3 Loggins command, and then they just went off from there. They went Pyromancer into Fatal Push, into Faithless Looting, looting multiple times, made a bunch of tokens, found some Lingering Souls in the yard. They just had a lot. Our Lilianas actually ended up being okay. Our first Lilies +1 got the Bedlam Reveler out of their hand, which was quite nice. And then subsequent Lilies ended up just kind of, one drew a Lightning Bolt, because otherwise she was in danger of ulting. And they just basically cashed in for some tokens. Now, that's not the most impressive use case of Liliana. There are much more impressive displays that she can have, but as far as bad matchups for Lily go, this is definitely one of them. And we ended up putting her to some pretty good use anyway. That said, we've got good old Goyf is always just so good in this matchup. He gets chumped for days, doesn't matter. Big enough threat that he just ground through the tokens and eventually closed out the game with some very important help from the treetop villages. So, good game. Now let's go to the sideboard and see how we get even grindier here. Alright, my friends, we are here to sideboard against Mardu Pyromancer. Now, we have a lot of cards that are very, very good against this deck, and then we have another category of cards, kind of the next tier down, that are okay. They might be better than what we're doing in the main deck, but we have some very good cards, and look at that, they all kind of happen to be right over here. These cards are all fantastic, so let's go through these and see why. First off, we have Nile Spellbomb. This is kind of the definition of a matchup that Spellbomb is good in. They're a grindy deck that tries to attrition us out and tries to deplete our resources, so something that attacks their strategy of using the graveyard for value while replacing itself is very, very important. This is an example of a matchup where Spellbomb is better than Leyline of the Void, for the most part, while a deck like Bridgevine, Leyline of the Void might be better than Spellbomb. So the fact that Spellbomb's a good grindy value card here is fantastic. As always, it's likely to grow the Tarmogoyf too, because it's an artifact. That's nice. Engineered Explosives is just a really, really clean way to sweep up the tokens. Also grows the Goyf while we're at it. And unlike Maelstrom Pulse, this will hit both the Elementals and the Lingering Souls. Feels good. Careful not to sweep up your own clues with this if you can help it. Also in a really weird spot, you can hit a young Pyromancer with it. We have way better spot removal. We'd rather save this for tokens, but again, games get weird. This can hit that too. I just mentioned Maelstrom Pulse. It's fantastic. We have one main. We want another one. This can hit the tokens primarily, but also can hit Pyro as a 1-for-1 or Bedlam Reveler if need be. Plus any other strange permanents they might play out of the side. Golgari Charm. Charm is fantastic here. This is yet another sweeper for the tokens, and of course they are not a deck that's building around tokens with Anthem effects or anything like that. So this is just going to cleanly sweep the tokens and the young Pyromancer while we're at it, all for 2 mana at instant speed. It's so good. This can hit Blood Moon if it's still in post side, which it may well be. And the regen mode is also live, so this is a card that really shines in the matchup. So right out of the gates, we have 5 spectacular cards to bring in. I don't think most BG Rock decks will have all 5 of these in their sideboard. Certainly Explosives is a little uncommon. A lot of people don't play 2 Spell Bombs. A lot of people don't play Golgari Charm, and a lot of people won't play Pulse if they have one main, so we are kind of extra tooled out for the Mardu matchup, and that's not necessarily intentional. It's just how this balanced sideboard ended up working out. So Fulminator Mage does not do much. Choke does actual nothing. Obstinate Baloth is actually kind of decent. I've seen them play Lilianas of the Veil in their 75s. I don't know how likely it is that it will come in against us, to be honest, but Baloth is reasonable if we expect that, for sure. Nissa is also reasonable. It's fine if our 2-drop Tarmogoyf is kind of chewing through tokens one at a time. It's less fine if our 5-drop is getting chumped by tokens all day. That said, this is still a grindy match. She's a great grindy value card. Buying things back is quite relevant. Just for sheer clunkiness, she is in the maybe for now, but we could definitely see bringing her in. I like Languish, so against these token decks, I never really quite know how to feel about board wipes, right? Because sometimes you need them to live, but sometimes you really only 1-for-1 them. Like if they play a Pyro, they play a few Lootings and Bolts and whatever else, they build an army. Then you have to Damnation them away. You've really only 1-for-1 them as far as cards go, and hey, maybe you killed some of your own stuff along the way. So I'm going to hedge by not bringing in Damnation, but bringing in Languish, because of course Languish is going to kill literally everything they play, except if they have a way to give Reveler prowess and a response, I guess. That's not really their style of play, but worth noting. But that's my hedge, that's my split here. Kalidas, Trader of Get. So, they're a graveyard deck, right? He's great. Well, read the text more carefully, and maybe not, because he does not... His Exile and Create a Zombie ability does not trigger off the tokens, which is, of course, most of what they actually put onto the field. As far as killing their Pyromancers and Revelers go, yeah, that will trigger, but they're not recursive threats anyway, so the Exile's not that relevant. So he looks good. I think he's actually a maybe in this matchup. You know, it's a lifelinker. It's fine. I think it's a maybe. Collective Brutality is also a maybe. We'll have to see what else happens. I kind of like this because it can kill young Pyro, or look at the hand if that makes sense. Discard in general is not very good against them, but most of what you'll want to take is probably an instant or sorcery, so that's fine. Drain is a decent floor in this matchup. We're not interested in Duress. Surgical Extraction. I don't know. You know, they use a lot of graveyard cards for sure, but is it worth extracting them? I actually don't think so. If we had fewer of these first 5 cards that are really, really good, then I would probably bring this in. The fact that we are so well kitted out against them means that I don't want to go down on value. I don't want to go down on cards trying to take away a key part of their graveyard, because, you know, they don't really have a key card that we can't beat. We just have to be able to keep pace with them. And this runs the risk of putting us behind on resources. So it certainly merits getting put in the maybe slot, but I actually don't think I want it. That said, let's bring in our 6 definites and see what we do not like. Right away, we have a lot of bad cards. Liliana the Veil, hey, you know, she pulled her weight last game, but realistically, she is quite bad. Let's see. Discard is certainly not really where we want to be. I'm probably looking to take out these 4, if not more. We could run with the coward split of Inquisition and Thoughtseize, preserve our life total a little bit, but still be able to pop the Reveler. I don't even know if I like that. I might just lose the Inquisitions altogether. Think about putting another Thoughtseize back in. You know, Fatal Push, I think killing a Pyromancer on curve is good enough to leave most of these in. That said, you know, we have other ways to do it. This is where sideboarding gets really tricky, right? Because we have to compare Trophy, Decay, and Push. Trophy is pretty clearly worse than the other two in a lot of ways, except it hits Reveler, and I think that's pretty huge. Decay is pretty clearly worse than Push in pretty much every way except that it hits Blood Moon. And Liliana of the Veil if they have her and bring her in. And Fatal Push, of course, blanks on some of those things I just listed, but remains the most tempo efficient card. So this is where it gets a little bit tricky. So before we take anything else out, let's see what we want to bring in. You know, I kind of like this Obstinate Baloth. What if we just say, we're going to do this and we're going to diversify our top end? Tasigur is okay here. He's definitely serviceable. But I kind of like the look of this. We're at 59 cards. Okay. We have enough bad... We can trim away on some of this subpar removal. Like, there are pros and cons to each of these, but playing these many copies just cannot be correct. So this might be overboarding, but I'm going to say let's just bring in all of our maybe board cards. Even the Surgical Extraction that I just kind of maligned. I think that when we have this much spot removal and our removal got this much better post-side, we can afford to replace one piece of average or mediocre removal with this extraction. So why don't we just go ahead and say that we'll give them their basics. We'll just cut the Decay over a Trophy. And do we cut one Fatal Push or one Trophy? Here I don't know. I think I'm leaning toward the Fatal Push. I think I'm leaning toward keeping all 4 Fatal Pushes in. So, I would absolutely love to hear your feedback on that sideboarding. My first 5 cards, I was like, yes, for sure. This is what we're doing. This is going to be great. But then we ended up bringing another how many cards in? We have 1, 2, 3, 4. So we brought in 11 sideboard cards total. 5 are nailed on, awesome. And literally probably all 6 of the others are debatable. So your thoughts would be most welcome. Let's break it out for you like this. Man, you know, feels like overboarding, but we've got a lot to do and a lot that's a little bit mediocre. And you know, I actually kind of like the way this looks. We might be a little bit too top-end heavy for our own good, but this is a grindy matchup. We're going to make our land drops. We're going to get there. So let's go to Game 2 and see how this really heavy sideboarding treats us. Alright, everybody, we are back for Game 2, and our hand is fine. It's fine. We did not see any of the 11 cards that we brought in from the side, so that is a little bit unexciting. However, they are an attrition deck. We don't really want to mulligan functional hands. Tarmogoyf is great in the matchup. Fatal Push is great if they ever find a young Pyromancer, and if they don't, we're probably doing okay. We have another threat in the form of Tasigur, who's just fine. We've got our best manland here by far. And Field of Ruin's not the best in this matchup, but it can potentially take them off white at some point. That said, we're pretty vulnerable to Blood Moon. We if they have a second Pyromancer after our first push is spent, we could run into some trouble. But I think this is a keep, especially on the draw, where we are getting another look at action before we make our turn 1 play. Our opponent has mulliganed to 6. They have mulliganed to 5. Alright, that is great news for us. This is an attrition matchup. We're already 2 cards up. That said, all of their virtual card advantage with Faithless Looting can get them right back in a game like this. And they will shock in a Blood Crypt, and sure enough, they're going to start right out with the looting, sculpting their hand, potentially getting good value into the graveyard. Wow, those are some unusual cards to pitch. So, first of all, pitching the Young Pyromancer is, of course, unusual for obvious reasons. It's the namesake card of the deck. It's usually their best play on turn 2. So, the fact that they pitched that means that maybe they are just digging for lands. That's the best thing I can think of. Or they have redundant copies in hand, and they're digging for action to make him good. This is also an unusual pitch, not so much that they pitched it, but that I'm surprised to see it come in against us. I don't think Surgical Extraction is very good against my deck, but could be wrong. That said, it is now in the graveyard and is probably not going to play a role in this game. We draw another Fatal Push. That's fine. Yeah, that's a fine one. I think the upside of deploying our man land here, our tap land, is better than holding up Blooming Marsh for a Fatal Push. We are very happy to delay our Tarmogoyf for a turn next turn if it means we get to push the Pyro that they may or may not have. They will untap, they will loot again, so no Pyromancer this turn. They're going to pitch another Pyromancer and another Faithless Looting. Okay, fair enough. Yep, so one of the 2 first reads was correct. They are certainly digging for lands. That is unfortunate for them. Yeah, I mean, getting 2 Pyromancers out of the way that they voluntarily took out of their hand, that feels pretty great. That said, we saw them return one with the Kolagan's Command game 1, and then kind of go off with it, so that's certainly a real possibility. But for now, they have very kindly beefed up our Tarmogoyf to a 3/4, so we can safely deploy it without fear of Lightning Bolt. There's their second land. They're going to play it. They're going to pass. Probably a little tilting for them to find it after they had to loot away a couple Pyromancers. That said, they've probably got some good stuff in hand if they did choose to loot away the Pyros rather than hang on to them until they found their second land. No reason to do anything here besides attack first. See what our opponent has. Okay, Fatal Push is definitely a card worth keeping. I can see why they didn't loot that one away against a Tarmogoyf deck. So we're going to pass. Little bit tempting to play Tireless Tracker here because they're down to 2 cards in hand. They just blew a removal spell. Maybe our tracker just lives, right? Or maybe it doesn't. Maybe it doesn't. We are under no pressure. We are ahead on cards. And one of their best outs at this point is going to be a Bedlam Reveler, and reaching the threshold to cast it. So hanging on to the tracker here allows us to go turn 4 tracker, swamp, holding up Fatal Push, or even just pushing right then and there if we need to, and start generating value that can realistically outgrind their best cards. This also allows us to hold up Fatal Push right now in case they do have another Young Pyromancer. They have a Sacred Foundry, and they're going to flash back a Faithless Looting. Alright, so the dig is on. We've got a lot of value still in the yard. And they're going to pitch yet another Looting and a Lightning Bolt. So they've already seen all 4 Faithless Lootings in their first 4 turns. That is a little insane. But they're not going to play to the board this turn, so we just get to pass. It is Tireless Tracker time, as predicted. At this point, I think the upsides of being able to Fatal Push something next turn are higher than the upside of deploying an Overgrown Tomb tapped. We might be interested in starting to really clock them before they can continue to flash back too many more Faithless Lootings. For that reason, we might be willing to, for example, if they play a Lingering Souls, we can push a Souls token out of the way on their end step and not worry about the double block. So I like playing the Swamp there. If they find a Blood Moon, it's also our first basic on the field. We can dig with our mountains for a clue and potentially find a forest or another swamp to make more plays around a Blood Moon. But they don't have Blood Moon, they have Mountain into Dreadbore. Okay, they've certainly found a lot of removal considering their unfortunate mulligan. And then they'll just pass. We find another tracker off the top. What a beautiful thing. Just love, love, love this card. So good. Really good spot for it too, because it allows us to cleanly continue deploying lands painlessly. We get to pass holding up Clue or Fatal Push. We get to generate enough value where we are realistically outgrinding a Bedlam Reveler at this point. They're going to flashback another looting. They're going to pitch a Lingering Souls and an Inquisition. Lingering Souls is a good one, and they pitch an Inquisition because they have a Thoughtseize. Alright, fair enough, and they're happy they did because now they get to take away the Tasigur instead of being forced to take a Fatal Push. It's a much better take for them at this point of the game. We get to crack a clue here. Finding another land and then yet another land for turn. This is the good old Flood that just feels fine when you have a tireless tracker. We've drawn 4 lands in a row, so this is not great, but again, tracker putting them to very good use. Now, we're pretty far ahead, right? So do we just play whatever and do whatever? Well, not really. We still want to be optimal. So we could play Field of Ruin. We could, hold up the field, which potentially takes them off of white, and we can hold up Fatal Pushes. That's an option, and that's a decent one. We'd also be holding up a clue in that case. I, however, like being more proactive. 5 power plus 3 power, swinging for 5 is good. That puts them to 9. This puts them to 6. 6 is actually a pretty scary number for them to be at, because that means 1 cracked clue in this tracker is lethal. It means exactly 2 hits of the treetop is lethal. So I like being proactive here, which means we are going to take a window to resolve our tapped land. We're going to fire up the village, and we are going to get in for 8. We're going shields down for a turn, so if they go pyro into a bunch of things, that is unfortunate, but you know what? That would be pretty unlikely at this point, so they're going to flash back the souls and pass, so we're not punished for that. Drawing another land means we want to see another card before we decide what to do. Happy to crack a clue here. And we find yet another land, so we are flooding like crazy. However, this land is actually perfect. It allows us to play a little bit more around a potential Blood Moon. It allows us to obviously get 2 clues off the Tireless tracker. It allows us to have a as painless as possible fetch, and it allows us to just go ham here. We are just going to Fatal Push both of these tokens out of the way. We're going to fire up the Treetop Village, and the opponent's just going to scoop. So even if they had, even if they had 1 removal spell that was Fatal Push for the Tireless tracker, because Lightning Bolt doesn't do it here, tracker itself is lethal. So even if they had a Fatal Push, which they would have had a Revolt for the tracker, they're still at 3. We still have all the clues. We still have manlands. We've still got everything. So in order for that sequencing to be bad for me, they would have had to have had their last 2 cards be Lightning Bolt for the Treetop Village and Fatal Push for the Tireless tracker. And then they pretty much would have had to rip a Reveler off the top. So that would have just been the nut draw. After mulling to 5, they did not have the nut draw. Our proactive lines paid off. We closed out the game before they could churn through even more Faithless Lootings and start to find answers. So we were assisted by the mulligan, that is for sure. But do note that we saw almost a third of our deck, and we saw none of our 11 sideboard cards, which is kind of hilarious. We just ground them out with our main deck cards. We just forced an early removal with Tarmogoyf. We then had free reign with our tracker to start racking up clues. They dealt with the tracker. We found another one right off the top. They thought seized our other threat, but this tracker went all the way. Again, once more with assistance from the Treetop Village. So, like I said in the sideboard, Mardu Pyromancer is considered generally unfavorable. It's a matchup you don't want to see as a BGX deck in general. Our sideboard is spectacular against them. I would venture to say, just the way it lined up, again, I'm not specifically headhunting Mardu or anything like that, but it ended up looking just stellar against Mardu Pyromancer. Again, you can debate some of the specific decisions. Maybe I overboarded a little bit, but the sheer number of really good cards that we have is unusual for the archetype. That said, this is a winnable matchup, as we just saw, without seeing a single one of them. Didn't need EE, didn't need Spellbomb, didn't need any of the really good stuff, didn't need Maelstrom Pulse. We just ground them out the old-fashioned way with our main deck. So, well played by the opponent. You know, they had a really good sequence game one that started with buying back the Pyro, and they went off from there. And here they stuck in the game pretty well with a lot of good removal and a million Faithless Lootings, despite taking a pretty heavy mulligan to 5. So, GG's, well played, and I hope you enjoyed this match. I've been hearing a couple comments about how people want to see me play against Tier 1 matchups, and Mardu Pyromancer has taken a little dip, but it's still a top-tier deck. I hear you. The way I make videos for this channel, I have relatively limited time. I definitely can't play games all day. It's usually just a few games every few days, and then trying to find time to upload a good one. So sometimes I just don't run into tier decks, and I have a better match to upload against Blue Moon or Merfolk or an other tier 2 deck. So that said, I do hear you, and hopefully I can upload some matches coming up against Dredge, against humans, against spirits. We'll just see what the magic gods put across my plate. But until then, I hope you're enjoying the content. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful night. I will talk to you next time.